Hey guys! Welcome to our YouTube channel. For today's video, we will discuss the Chapter 2, Ancient Near East. On our discussion, we will find out the first of the River Valley civilization which developed among the Sumerians, a people of Mesopotamia. In the city-states of Sumer, government and religion were organized. A writing system was used and advances were made in architecture and technology. The Sumerians' achievements in many fields were passed on to the later peoples of Mesopotamia. Another great civilization grew up in Egypt along the Nile River.
More stable than the civilization in Mesopotamia, Egyptian civilization endured for 1,000 of years. Eventually, both Egypt and Mesopotamia fell under the rule of conquerors who established great empires. Contributions to civilization were also made by many other people in the Near East. In this region, new religious beliefs developed, and advances were made in writing, technology, and trade. This chapter describes the civilization and empires that developed in the ancient Near East. Here are the subtopics for this chapter. Civilization begins in Mesopotamia. Egyptian civilization lasts 3,000 years. Other Near Eastern people make contributions. Later empires dominate the Near East.
But before we start, we will leave a questions of where was Mesopotamia and what was the Fertile Crescent, which we will find out the answer after the discussion.
Unit 1. Civilization begins in Mesopotamia. Did you know that the Greeks gave this land the name Mesopotamia, which means between rivers, because the earliest of the River Valley civilization developed in Mesopotamia, the region between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. Today, it is the country of Iraq.
Sumerian civilization. City-states developed in Sumer. In late Neolithic times, about 6,000 years ago, nomad herders settled in the southern part of Mesopotamia and gradually changed to the farming way of life. Near the mouths of the two rivers, they found a marshy area that provided grazing for their herds and plentiful fish and bird life. Sumerian people joined the swamps so that they could farm the rich land, and they also built dams at dikes to keep the rivers from flooding fields. While in the drier northern areas, they built irrigation canals, and these were used to carry from the rivers to the fields when there was a little rain. Maybe some of you are not familiar of the word nomad. And for you to inform, nomad is a nomadic people, also known as nomads, are communities of people that move from one place to another rather than settling down in one location. Nomadism is distinguished from migration, which involves a major and permanent move from one location to another. Nomads, on the other hand, move periodically or cyclically, usually returning to their original location at various times. The Sumerians mixed with the farming people in southern Mesopotamia, became known as Sumer. Gradually, the farming villages along the river grew into 12 city-states. Each city-state included a city and the farmlands around it. Each had its own government and was independent of the other city-states. The Sumerians, like other ancient people, believed and worship in many gods. This belief is called polytheism. Each city-state considered itself the property of one of the gods who chose the city ruler and protected the city. Rulers were therefore thought to be responsible to the gods for keeping the irrigation system working, storing food for emergencies, and overseeing building projects. Sumerian artisans used new methods. There was little stone or timber in Mesopotamia, so Sumerian artisans worked with clay from the rivers to construct homes, palaces, and temples. The Sumerians shaped clay into bricks and dry it in the sun. Bricks for important buildings were baked, which made them last much longer. Most houses and temples were windowless, with rooms built around a central court. In each city, people built a large brick temple called a ziggurat, a home for their gods. Ziggurat is a pyramidal step temple tower that is an architectural and religious structure characteristic of the major cities of Mesopotamia, now mainly in Iraq, from the approximately 2200 until 500 BCE. The ziggurat was always built with a core of mud brick and an exterior covered with baked brick. It had no internal chambers and was usually square or rectangular, averaging either 170 feet or 50 meters square or 125 by 170 feet or 40 by 50 meters at the base. Approximately 25 ziggurats are known, being equally divided among Sumer, Babylonia, and Assyria. The Sumerians keep records on clay tablets. The Sumerians also devised a system of record keeping that used baked clay. With a sharp pointed stick, a Sumerian scribe or record keeper pressed wedge-shaped symbols into a square tablet of damp clay. This form of writing is called cuneiform. If scribes made mistakes, they could smooth out the clay and make corrections. The complete tablet was dried or baked and then stored in a library. Cuneiform tablets are an invaluable record of the history of the Sumerians and of later peoples in Mesopotamia. Each tablet ended with a complete date, day, month, and year, and the name of the city where the record was made. The tablets recording business transactions were also marked with the signature seals of buyers, sellers, and witnesses. Made in the shape of the hollow cylinders, signature seals were carved in stone and worn on a cord around the owner's neck. The Sumerians established schools. Only a few people were trained to write in cuneiform. The Sumerians established schools that trained boys in this art. Students were mostly the sons of upper-class professional priests, temple and palace officials, army officers, sea captains, and other scribes. The poor could not afford the school fees, and girls were not enrolled. The work was demanding. Hundreds of clay tablets on which Sumerian students practiced their lessons have been discovered. They showed that many years of disciplined work were needed to master cuneiform writing. To help their pupils practice, teachers prepared textbooks of word lists and mathematical problems. Students who learned that art worked as scribes for the temple, the royal court, or wealthy merchants. Summer falls to conquerors. The Sumerians did not form a strong or united government. Wars over land and water rights were common among the city-states. The time where summer fall and Akkad rises. About 2350 BC, conqueror named Sargon the Great, the ruler of the neighboring kingdom of Akkad, conquered the city-states. He brought them under his control and defeated city-states of Sumer. Sargon created the empire as part of the world's first empire, a state in which our ruler controls other kingdoms or territories that are included within the empire's boundaries. Mesopotamian society and culture. The people of Mesopotamia worship many gods. The belief in many gods continued among later Mesopotamians. These people believe in many major gods and goddesses and in thousands of lesser spirits and demons. They believe these were found everywhere, in the sky, in rivers, in wind, and fire, and storms. Prayers and rituals written on clay tablets indicate that the Mesopotamians greatly feared these gods and demons. Mesopotamians have written laws. Rulers in Mesopotamia were expected to carry out the gods' wishes in making and enforcing laws. Laws like business contracts and religious records began to be written down in cuneiform. Probably, the first written laws came from Ur-Nammu, who ruled Ur. About 2100 BC, the ruler of Babylon had the laws of the kingdom collected and organized. He then had the code of laws recorded on a block of stone 8 feet high. This made the laws visible to all the people and provided a lasting record. Copies of the laws were made on clay tablets and sent to all lands ruled by Babylon. Hammurabi's laws seem harsh today. They show many inequalities in Babylonian society. Nobles and priests were punished less severely than common people. Crimes involving property were treated very seriously. Women had fewer legal rights than men, but some ran shops and inns, owned property, and were allowed to testify in court even if they were slaves.
Laws protected Mesopotamian wives from abuse and neglect and made sure they received some payment if they were divorced. On the other hand, a wife might be forced into slavery for 3 years to pay back a debt her husband owed. The Mesopotamians make advances in mathematics and astronomy. Written laws were one advance made possible by having a system of writing. The Mesopotamians also made important advances in practical mathematics and astronomy. In mathematics, they drew up multiplication and division tables and made calculations using geometry. The Mesopotamians' number system used a base of 60. From this came the system of dividing a circle into 360 degrees and an hour into 60 minutes. The first written records in astronomy were made by the Mesopotamians. The clear, dry air made it possible to observe the stars regularly and record the changing position of the planets and the different phases of the moon. From the information in these records, the Mesopotamians developed a 12-month calendar based on the cycles of the moon. The Mesopotamians developed widespread trade. Because Mesopotamia lacked a number of resources, among them stone, timber, and metal trade was important to economy from earliest times. The two rivers provided a two-way to ship goods. The wheel and the sail improved transportation by both land and water. Each Mesopotamian city had a bazaar or marketplace, and merchants also set up trading posts in foreign lands. Copper came from the lands around the Persian Gulf, precious metals from Central Asia, and ivory from Africa and the west coast of India. Cedar and cypress woods and oils were shipped from the lands around the Mediterranean Sea. In exchange, Mesopotamian merchants exported wool and woven cloth, fine handicrafts, grains, and hides. Clay tablets reveal Mesopotamian history. Thousands of cuneiform tablets have been found in the Near East, dating back to the time of the Sumerian city-states. They include trade contracts, list of rulers, maps, poems, legends, prayers of the gods, and laws. Until the 19th century, however, they could not be read. In the 1840s, a British officer named Henry Rawlinson found the key to cuneiform writing. He identified 3 types of writing on a huge cliff known as the Behistun Rock, located on the old caravan route between Babylon and Ecbatana. The Behistun Rock was the key to the cuneiform tablets. It enabled scholars to translate the Mesopotamian owns records of their history, thoughts, and achievements, which known as the oldest records in the world. Unit 2. Egyptian civilization lasts 3,000 years. Southwest of Mesopotamia and the valley of the Nile River in Egypt, another civilization emerged. Although Egyptian civilization began somewhat later than that of Sumer, it was more stable and endured for several thousand years.
Here are the questions for Unit 2. How was the Nile River important to early peoples in Egypt? And what was the position of scribes and artisans?
The growth of Egyptian civilization. The Egyptians depend on the Nile River.
Since ancient times, Egypt has been called the gift of the Nile. Without this mighty river, all Egypt would be desert, for it receives little rainfall. From its source in Central Africa, the Nile flows north for more than 4,000 miles, emptying into the Mediterranean Sea. Heavy spring and summer rains at the source of the Nile once caused the river to overflow regularly each July. The yearly flooding of the Nile made it possible for Neolithic farmers to grow crops in the valley. The floodwaters brought moisture to the dry land and also left behind a layer of rich black soil that was excellent for crops. Farmers planted their crops as soon as the floodwaters receded. Silt carried by the river gradually built up a marshy, triangular delta at its mouth. This rich land was the home of many wild birds and animals and could be drained to create more farmland. To increase the number of crops they could grow each year, the ancient Egyptians built reservoirs to store water and dug canals to carry it to the fields. Building canals and reservoirs required the labor of large number of workers. People had to invent new technology and carefully plan and organize large irrigation projects.
They also devised methods of keeping track of the time when floods would occur. Besides encouraging farming, the Nile was an excellent transportation route. It helped unite the villages along the river. Vast desert to the east and west of the river protected Egypt from attack, allowing people of the Nile villages to enjoy long periods of peace and prosperity. The Egyptians believed in many gods. Like other farming people in ancient times, the Egyptians believed that many gods controlled nature, sent the yearly floods, and made the crops grow. The sun, the stars, and the Nile itself were seen as gods or as the dwelling places of gods. People in different parts of Egypt developed rituals to honor the god they saw as the most important. An important feature of Egyptian religion was the belief in life after death. The Egyptians connected their beliefs about birth and death with the rising and setting sun and with the yearly floods of the Nile. The god Osiris was seen as the ruler of the Nile and rich harvest, who died each year and was brought back to life by his wife Isis. Egyptians believed that when they died, their souls would be weighed against feathers symbolizing the law. Those who had lived good lives would journey to the other world ruled by Osiris. Egypt is united under one ruler. The farming villages along the Nile gradually were united into two kingdoms, Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. About 3100 BC, a ruler of Upper Egypt known as Menes conquered Lower Egypt and brought all of Egypt under his rule. Where the two kingdoms met, he built the city of Memphis as his capital. A double crown became his symbol. There were at least 30 dynasties in Egypt's history. Each of these dynasties ruled until it was overthrown or there were no heirs to rule. Some ruling families were foreigners who had gained control of Egypt, but most were Egyptian. Strong dynasties kept the country united as one kingdom under dynasties ruled in times of unrest and controlled only part of Egypt. Scholars divided the early history of Egypt according to the three periods when strong dynasties united the country. They called this the Old Kingdom in 2686 to 2181 BC, the Middle Kingdom which about 2040 to 1786 BC, and the New Kingdom for about 1570 to 1090 BC. Powerful rulers governed Egypt. The strong rule set up by Menes became the basis of the Old Kingdom. During this period, the rulers of Egypt established a strong central government in which they held supreme power. To the people of Egypt, the ruler, later called Pharaoh, was more than a king. He was also considered one of Egypt's many gods. As a god, the Pharaoh was believed to possess the secrets of heaven and earth. The Pharaoh and many officials controlled Egyptian life. The Pharaoh was responsible for all aspects of life in Egypt, keeping the irrigation works in order, directing the army, keeping peace, and issuing laws. He also controlled trade and the economy. Egyptian peasants paid most of their taxes in grain, which was stored in the royal warehouses. If there was a famine, feeding the people was the Pharaoh's responsibility. Taxes and payments from other countries were used to maintain public buildings, irrigation works, and port facilities. The Pharaoh owned Egypt's mines and quarries and the trading fleets that sailed to foreign lands. Foreign merchants had to deal with royal officials, not with the merchants of Egypt. Many officials were appointed to supervise the details of government, but the most important official was the chief overseer. Acting in the name of the Pharaoh, he presided over the royal court, acted as a diplomat, and was in charge of the tax collection and public works. Lesser officials helped the chief overseer carry out the many details of running the Egyptian government and economy. Gradually, powerful officials became an upper class of nobles. Pyramids are built during the Old Kingdom. As lasting monuments to their power, pharaohs of the Old Kingdom had immense pyramids built to serve as their tombs. This demanded not only the greatest skills of Egypt's architects and engineers, but also the labor of thousands of workers. The Old Kingdom declines. Royal power reached its height with the age of pyramid building. Then the nobles gained more authority in the government. Some who governed in distant parts of Egypt challenged the supreme rule of the pharaoh, and Egypt was torn by civil war for nearly 200 years. The Middle Kingdom restores Egypt's prosperity. About 2040 BC, Egypt again came under the control of a strong dynasty, which ruled from Thebes. Culture and trade flourished for 250 years during the Middle Kingdom. The pharaohs sent expeditions into Nubia to bring back gold, while trading expeditions traveled to Palestine, Syria, and the island of Crete in the Mediterranean. Eventually, the power of nobles and priests grew again and weakened the pharaoh's rule. As the Middle Kingdom's power declined in late 1700 BC, invaders from Asia moved into the Delta region. A foreign dynasty rules Egypt. The newcomers were called Hyksos, meaning prince from foreign lands. They had horses and war chariots, bronze swords and daggers, and heavy bows. These superior weapons helped the Hyksos gain power and establish a ruling dynasty by about 1600 BC. Egypt remained under foreign rule for about 100 years. Then the Egyptians learned to use the Hyksos weapons and regained their independence. Egypt expands during the New Kingdom. About 1500 BC, a new dynasty established the New Kingdom and began a time of expansion for Egypt. Aggressive pharaohs built an empire, conquering land eastward to the Euphrates River in Mesopotamia and southward in Africa. The period is sometimes also called the Empire Age. The pharaohs demanded that the conquered peoples of empire pay tribute to Egypt. Several strong pharaohs ruled Egypt during the 500 years of the New Kingdom. Among them was Thutmose II, who became pharaoh about 1512 BC. Thutmose added Nubia to the empire and conquered Syria and Palestine. Thutmose's wife Hatshepsut was the daughter of an earlier pharaoh. When Thutmose died, she seized power and ruled for more than 20 years. Hatshepsut was the first great woman ruler in history. She did not seek military victories but built temples and sent large trading expeditions to other lands. The temples she ordered built at Thebes are among the outstanding achievements of Egyptian architecture. Thutmose's son, Thutmose I, regained the throne when Hatshepsut died, a strong warrior king. Thutmose I ruled for nearly 30 years more and expanded the empire along the Euphrates. The tribute he demanded from the conquest was used to decorate temples in Egypt. Akhenaton tries to change Egyptian religious beliefs. Even strong pharaohs were sometimes challenged by powerful priests and nobles. In the 1300 BC, the pharaoh Amenhotep IV tried to reduce the power of the priests in Egyptian government. He sought to change the Egyptians' worship of many gods to the worship of a single supreme god, Aton, who was represented by the sun. Amenhotep took the name Akhenaton, which means it is well with Aton. He spoke of Aton as the creator of the universe and the god of love, justice, and peace, while Akhenaton tried to give a new direction to Egyptian religious thought. His religion is usually not considered a true belief in one god. Akhenaton's religion recognized two gods, Aton and the pharaoh himself, who was still worshipped as a god. The Egyptian priests strongly opposed Akhenaton's attempt to change Egyptian religion, and the worship of the Aton gained few followers. Shortly after Akhenaton died, about 1360 BC, his 9-year-old son-in-law Tutankhamen became pharaoh. The monuments to Aton were destroyed and the new religion soon died. Ramesses maintains the empire. Ramesses, who ruled from 1304 BC to 1237 BC, was one of the last effective rulers of the New Kingdom when he came to the throne. Hittite warriors from Asia Minor were making inroads into the eastern parts of Egypt's empire. Ramesses fought nearly 20 years against the Hittites before peace was made. His marriage to the daughter of the Hittite king helped to keep peace for the rest of his long reign this period. Ramesses had many temples built and colossal statues made of himself and his family. The statues of Ramesses at the temples of Abu Simbel, carved in a rock cliff, were 65 feet high. The pharaoh's power at home again began to weaken. This time, outside invasions also threatened the existence or the empire. By about 1200 BC, Egyptian civilization had passed its time of greatness. Libyans from the desert to the west invaded the fertile valley of the Nile.
Egyptian society and culture. Egyptians leave written records. Early in the Old Kingdom, the pharaohs began to keep written records of their reigns. An Egyptian writing system was a form of picture writing called hieroglyphics. The name hieroglyphics, from the Greek word for sacred carving, is first encountered in the writings of Diodorus Siculus in the 1st century BCE. Earlier, other Greeks had spoken of sacred signs when referring to Egyptian writing. Among the Egyptian scripts, the Greeks labeled as hieroglyphic the script that they found on temple walls and public monuments, in which the characters were pictures sculpted in stone. Scholars decipher Egyptian hieroglyphics. In AD 1799, French engineers working in the Nile Delta dug up a stone tablet. The tablet, now known as the Rosetta Stone. It is called Rosetta Stone because it was discovered in the town called Rosetta, had been carved in 196 BC. It contained inscription in 3 languages, hieroglyphics, or more recent Egyptian script and Greek. Like the Behistun rock, the Rosetta Stone provided the key to deciphering ancient writing. Scribes have important skills. The scribes who wrote hieroglyphics were a special class in Egyptian society. Scribes kept the records that made government orderly and efficient. They wrote down hymns and poems to the gods and instructions for religious ceremonies. It took years of training to become a scribe. Schooling began at the age of 5 and lasted for some 12 years. Egypt has skilled artisans. Artisans also held a special place in Egyptian society. They produced a great variety of finely made goods, furniture, cloth, glassware, baskets, and jewelry. Some of these products were used in trade. Others went to decorate the homes and tombs of the wealthy. The more skilled the artisans were, the more they were paid. Priests and nobles have wealth and power. The families of those who held high government positions made up the upper class of nobles in ancient Egypt. Paintings and small clay models of their homes show that they lived in spacious houses, built around a central courtyard with beautiful gardens. Many servants waited on them. Priests were the nobles' equals in high Egyptian society. They advised the pharaoh and planned and directed the religious ceremonies. Most people in Egypt are peasants. Peasant men and women work in the fields from dawn to dark. The peasants produce the food for Egypt's cities and the surplus on which the pharaoh's trade depended. The pharaohs were considered the owners of the land, although they might give some large holdings to nobles or temples. Peasant farmers had to turn over the part of their crops and livestock to the pharaohs as rent or taxes. Prisoners become slaves. The labor of slaves helped to maintain Egyptian society. Most slaves were prisoners captured in war. Enslaving conquered peoples was a common practice throughout the ancient world. The number of slaves increased greatly during the New Kingdom while the Egyptians were building an empire. Women respected in Egypt. Women could inherit and own property and sell it without asking any man's permission. She could also run a business and testily in court. Egyptian wife and mother was shown great respect. The Egyptians developed knowledge of medicine and astronomy. Papyrus scrolls provide evidence of the Egyptians' knowledge of medicine. One of the first medical textbooks was an Egyptian work written in diagnosis and treated of injuries. They also classified diseases and used a variety of medicines to cure sickness. The Egyptians also studied astronomy. Their observation of the sun and stars were important both in farming and in conducting religious rituals. Architects and engineers developed new techniques. Engineers used geometry to survey and map the land. to plan buildings and to develop irrigation works. Egyptian architects were the first to use stone columns in building homes and such public buildings as temples and palaces. Tombs provide a home for the dead. In the tombs, Egyptians placed whatever they felt the person would need in the afterlife. The tomb was considered the home of the dead person. Only some handful foods and a few tools were buried with the poor person. The tombs of the wealthy, however, were filled with clothing, food, furniture, games, perfumes, cosmetics, jewels, and everything that might be needed for a pleasant life in the other world. The tomb of Tutankhamun displays Egypt's wealth. In AD 1922, a British archaeologist named Howard Carter discovered the tomb of Tutankhamun, who came to the throne about 1358 BC and died at the age of 18. Carter's first impression in the dim light was the strange animals, statues, and golds. Excavation revealed an immense treasure, thousands of objects, golden furniture, stone boxes and vases, carved and painted chests, statue of gold, and jewelry made of precious stones. The mummy of Tutankhamun was found in separate chamber lying in a coffin of solid gold. Unit 3. Other Near Eastern peoples make contributions. Where Europe and Asia meet at the eastern end of Mediterranean Sea is the peninsula of Asia Minor. Since ancient times, this peninsula and the coast south of it have been a crossroads for traders, nomadic herders, and invading armies. Many different people migrated to this region, and some settled there. In ancient times, the peoples of this area included Hittites, Lycians, Phoenicians, and Hebrews. Each of these people made important contributions to civilization. Here are the questions for Unit 3. Who were the Aryans, and what kind of religious belief originated with the Hebrews? Indo-Europeans migrate to the Near East. About 2000 BC, people known as Aryans began to migrate from their homeland. They traveled in several directions, mostly to the south and west. As they migrated, the Aryans took with them distinctive language. Today, this language is usually called Indo-European. One group of Aryans settled in the mountains of Eastern Asia Minor and mixed with people living there. They became known as the Hittites. The Hittites learned to use iron. While other Near Eastern peoples were still using bronze, Hittite artisans had discovered how to work iron ore into iron. Iron was rare and was used mainly for religious objects or for swords and statues presented as royal gifts. People of the Near East soon realized that iron tools and weapons were stronger and sharper than those made of bronze. Legions of Northern Asia Minor began the use of coins in trade. Gold, silver, or a mixture of both metals was formed into discs of equal weight, stamped into the metal of coin where its value and a symbol that showed government authority and approval. Phoenician seafarers spread ideas. Phoenician sailors explored the Mediterranean. They established colonies as far as northern Africa and southern Spain, as well as on several Mediterranean islands. Phoenician traders may even have reached Britain and southern Africa because they spread the ideas of the Near East as well as its product. The Phoenicians are called carriers of civilization. The Phoenicians used a writing system based on an early alphabet. Each letter symbol stood up for a sound, and so any word could be written by using combinations of letters. The letter symbol were far easier to learn than the thousands of picture symbols needed to write hieroglyphics. Migrating peoples occupied the eastern Mediterranean coast. About 1200 BC, migrating peoples called Philistines occupied part of Canaan. From their name, the land became known as Palestine. Another part of this region became the home of the Israelites or Hebrews. Early Hebrew history is recorded in the Bible. The first books of the Bible are the source of much of early Hebrew history. Originally herders from Mesopotamia, the Hebrews traveled into Canaan with their leader, Abraham. Because of famine, some Hebrews then moved to Egypt and many settled there as farmers and herders. However, the Pharaohs began to persecute the Hebrews in Egypt. A Hebrew kingdom is established. About 1020 BC, they established a kingdom under the first Israelite king, Saul. Saul's successors, David, was a poet king who defeated the Philistines and made Jerusalem to royal capital. The Hebrew kingdom reached its height of power and prosperity under the rule of David's son, Solomon, who ruled about 972 to 922 BC. A large army protected the kingdom. In Jerusalem, Solomon built a palace and magnificent temple for Yahweh. Many skilled artisans from Phoenicia helped to build the temple with cedar wood, gold, and silver. The southern part was conquered in 586 BC by Nebuchadnezzar, who destroyed Solomon's temple. Several thousand Hebrews were captured and sent to Babylon. When the Persians conquered Babylon in 538 BC, they allowed the exiles, now called Jews, to return home. Palestine was under Persian rule at that time and continued to be held by other conquerors for centuries. The Hebrews contribute a new religious outlook. The Hebrews had a lasting influence on world religions. They believe in one God, a belief called monotheism. This made the Hebrew religion profoundly different from the Mesopotamian and Egyptian belief in a great numbers of gods. Other Near Eastern people believed that their gods had human characteristics and weaknesses. The gods needed food, drink, and sleep. They misbehaved and were punished. They could grow old and die. To the Hebrews, God, or Yahweh, was eternal, ageless, and supreme. He had created the universe and all within it. He had total power. Prophets throughout Hebrew history. Many men and several women were inspired to act as prophet, that is, messenger of God. The prophets preached obedience to God's law, warned the dangers of breaking this law. They urged the Hebrews to remain firm in their faith. Unit 4. Later empires dominate the Near East. Both Egyptian and Mesopotamian rulers had built empires by conquering other lands and bringing different peoples under the one roof. By about the 9th century BC, powerful rulers in the Near East again began to build empires. This included the lands of the ancient empires as well as many smaller kingdoms. Eventually, the entire Near East came under one rule. Here's the questions for Unit 4. For what other reason was the Nile River important? And where did Persians live when they began to build an empire? The Assyrians are ruthless conquerors. The Assyrians became skilled and ruthless warriors. Their well-trained army used iron weapons, horse-drawn war chariots, and battering rams that could knock down the walls of enemy cities. The Assyrian Empire is well organized. By about 8th century BC, the Assyrians had developed efficient methods to govern the people they conquered. Officials were appointed to collect taxes and tribute, keep law and order, and build public works. Roads were built to tie together the parts of the empire, and messengers carried news from place to place. Assyrian rulers, however, still used terror to control their subjects in conquered lands. A new Babylonian empire arises. Nebuchadnezzar conquered much of the Fertile Crescent, capturing Jerusalem and Phoenician city of Tyre. Nebuchadnezzar also rebuilt Babylon into a magnificent city. Huge gates in the city walls were decorated with colorful glazed bricks in animal designs. The ziggurat of Babylonian Marduk was rebuilt. The city of Babylon became most famous for a series of terraces planted with trees and flowers and watered by streams. Supposedly built for Nebuchadnezzar's wife, this became famous as the Hanging Garden of Babylon. Persian ruler conquered a vast territory. The Chaldean lands were soon threatened by the Persians, one of several Aryan peoples who had settled in the area east of Mesopotamia. About 547 BC, led by Cyrus the Great, the Persians began to build the largest empire that had yet existed in the ancient Near East. Persian kings organized and unite their empires. Persian rulers sought ways to tie the vast empire together. They improved and extended the Assyrians' roads to link distant cities in speed travel by soldiers, merchants, and messengers. Everywhere in the empire, the same coins and same system of weights and measure were used. Government officials and merchants throughout the empire commonly used the same language, which is Aramaic in official business. A new religion emerges among the Persians. About 6th century BC, a Persian religious teacher named Zoroaster began to teach that human beings had a choice between doing good and doing evil. He saw the world as a struggle between these forces. Ahura Mazda, the wise lord, was seen as the supreme god, standing for truth, goodness, and light. Ahriman was the evil spirit representing darkness. According to Zoroaster, Ahura Mazda and forces of good would triumph at the end of the world, when the earth would be destroyed by fire. The religion has endured through the centuries and is still followed the present day in Iran and India.
Hello everyone, this is your presenter Melkay Eliorimo from BSED 2nd year.
This is your presenter, Rosamy P. Arsaga from BSED 2nd year.
We can do this para sa bayan at kinabukasan. Thank you for watching.